Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today we continue our study of Malachim Bet, the second book of Kings. We are in chapter 24, that is Parak Chaf Daled. We are up to Pasuk Aleph, that is verse 8. In the last podcast, we read of the terrible careers of Yehoyachin, who was the king who took over after the death of Tzidkiyahu. And then we read of and he was eventually taken down, arrested by the Egyptian authorities for rebelling against Egypt, and Yehoyachin was then placed in his stead. Both of them had led the people away from the reforms that their father Yoshiyahu had tried to establish and tried to bring the people back to God, but both of them brought the people straight back to idol worship, corruption, oppression, and the spilling of innocent blood, which, as we remember from the book of Isaiah, usually is a reference to a corruption of the courts, where the innocent are led to suffer and eventually often leading to their deaths. This and also the deaths of human sacrifice, as awful as it sounds and as difficult as it is to say, these are the things that were happening. So Yehoyachin had now passed on, and now Yehoyachin, his son, is taking over. So now we are up to Yoshiyahu's grandson, Yehoyachin, because Yehoyachaz and Yehoyachin were brothers. Yehoyachin is now the son of Yehoyachin. Ben Shmona Esrei Shana Yehoyachin b'malcho. Yehoyachin was 18 years old when he became king. U'shelosha chadashim malach b'Yerushalayim, and he ruled in Jerusalem for 3 months. B'shem imo, his mother's name was Nechushta bat El Natan miYerushalayim. His mother was from Jerusalem. That was her name. Vayas hora be'enei Adonai kechol asher asa aviv, and he did evil in the eyes of God, just as his father Yehoyachin had done. And at this time, Nebuchadnezzar, who is now the king of Bavel, the king of Babylon, is pissed off with what is going on in Judah, this constant rebellion. So he comes to put down the rebellion. Bo'esahi, in this time, Olu Avdei Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel Yerushalayim. The servants of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, which is now the dominant force after they had subdued Assyria, then they had subdued Egypt. Babylon is now the reigning empire. They send messengers to Jerusalem, Vatovo Ir Bamatzor, and eventually they besieged the city of Jerusalem. Vayavo Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel Alo Ir. Now the king himself of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, comes to the city of Jerusalem. While his servants, while his armies had laid siege to the city. Yehoyachin melech Yehuda el melech Bavel. Yehoyachin, the king of Yehuda, went out to greet the king, having heard that the king was there, knowing that the city was doomed, and so he went out just really to beg for mercy, to hope whatever the king would want from him. This is how most of the commentaries understand this. He and his mother, Va'avadov, as we can see from all of the mentions of the kings throughout the book of Malachim, the king's mother was an important figure in the government. That's why she's named almost every time the king's mother's name is mentioned. Va'avadav, and his servants, V'sarav, and his officers. Sav, and his Sav could sometimes mean his eunuchs or his high level assistants. Vayikach oso melech Bavel b'shnas shmona lemalcho. And in the 8th year of his reign, he took him as prisoner. Vayotzei misham et kol otzros beis Adonai, and Nebuchadnezzar, in other words, he came out to see what Nebuchadnezzar's demands were. So demand A was taking the king himself hostage. He also took out from there all of the treasure houses of the temple of God, v'otros beis hamelech, and all of the treasures in the palace of the king. Vayikatzeitz et kol klei hazahav asher asa Shlomo melech Yisrael beheichal Adonai kasher diber Adonai. And he cut down and cut into pieces all of the vessels that were built out of gold, that were made out of gold, that were in the temple. He took them all down and peeled the gold off the vessels that were some of them were wooden and covered in gold. He took them all. V'higla et kol Yerushalayim v'et kol hasorim, and he exiled all of the people of Jerusalem, v'et kol hasorim, and all of the officers or princes, v'et kol giborei achayil, and all of the leaders of the military. Aseret alafim goleh, he exiled 10,000 of them. V'chol hechorosh v'hamasker, and in addition, all of the artisans and craftsmen. The charash and masker are those that masker metal workers, and charash is carpenters, so that they couldn't rebuild. Lo nishar zulat dalat amaretz. The only thing he left there was only the poorest people of the land, just the peasants, just the beggars. That's all he left in the land. Vayegel et Yehoyachin Bavela, and he exiled Yehoyachin the king to Babylon. V'et Em HaMelech, and the mother of the king, v'et Neshei HaMelech, and the wives of the king, v'et Sorisov, and his assistants, v'et Elei Haaretz, all of these strong people, all of these strong leaders of the land, Holich Golam Yerushalayim Bavela, he exiled them from Jerusalem to Babylon. V'et Kol Anshei HaChayil, and all of the soldiers, right, Shivat Alafim, which made up a number of 7,000, v'achorosh v'hamasker elef, and the skilled carpenters and smiths were 1,000 people. Hakol giborim osei milchama, and anyone who was strong and able to fight in war. Vayiveim melech Bavel gole Bavela, and the king of Babylon took them into exile to Babylon. Vayamlech melech Bavel et Matanya dodo tachtav. And he in his place he took Matanya, who was his uncle, the king's uncle, so another brother of Yehoyakim and Yehoyachin. He took in his place Vayasev et Shemo Tzidkiyahu, and he changed his name to Tzidkiyahu. We saw this before, that when the conquering king, the higher king, puts in a vassal king, he often changes his name just to assert and show that this person is a vassal of his, to the extent that he will even name him. Ben Esrim va'achas shana Tzidkiyahu b'malcho. Tzidkiyahu was 21 years old when he became king over a destitute kingdom, over a kingdom where the temple had been stripped of its treasures, the palace had been stripped of its treasures, but more importantly, all of the leadership had been exiled. Now, if you remember, we saw a similar pattern when the 10 tribes were exiled, and when we carefully analyze the text over there, it seems evident and that it was only the elite that was exiled in order to subdue the people, so that the people could not rise up and will have no one to lead them. But he did leave one king there, and he ruled v'achas esrei shana malach b'Yerushalayim. He was the king in Jerusalem for 11 years. V'shem imo Chamutal bat Yirmiyah milivna, and his mother's name was Chamutal, the daughter of Yirmiyah from the place of Livna. This was the same mother who was the mother of Yehoachaz, the first son of Yoshiyahu to take over the kingdom. So he was a full brother of Yehoachaz, Tzidkiyahu was. Vayas hora be'enei Adonai kechol asher asa Yehoyakim. He did evil in the eyes of God, just like Yehoyakim, the one who preceded him, who was his nephew. Ki al af Adonai haysa b'Yerushalayim u'v'Yehuda. Because it was because of the anger of God against Jerusalem and Yehuda, ad hishlicho osam me'al panav, until it was the wrath had built up until he was ready to throw them away from his face, meaning get rid of them, exile them from Jerusalem. Vayimro Tzidkiyahu b'melech Bavel, and Tzidkiyahu then rebelled against the king of Babylon. It gives the sense that because some people ask the question here, most commentaries understand this to mean that because God was angry, that's why Tzidkiyahu rebelled, which sounds like God made Tzidkiyahu rebel, which brings up the question, which we find in other places, especially with Pharaoh in Egypt, back in the book of Exodus. How could God, it seems like God is pushing him to make a decision in a certain way, taking away his free will, so to speak. I'm thinking that that's not really what it means to say here. But it means to say it was because of the anger that God had against Jerusalem and Judah. Therefore, Tzidkiyahu rebelled against Babylon. And what does that mean? Well, if you remember, if we go back to the days of Yoshiyahu, right? Yoshiyahu was faithful to God. He did everything right. At least that's what it seemed like. He destroyed all the idols. He rededicated everything to God. And what happened? He ended up getting killed in battle. Well, you can imagine how his descendants, his sons, and Tzidkiyahu being one of his sons, would look and say, what was the point? If God is angry, why should I be good? Why should I listen to God? Why should I act in the right way? He didn't stop to think, well, maybe it's because Yoshiyahu only started the process. Yoshiyahu, it went to his head. He thought, okay, now I was faithful to God. Now he's going to help me. It doesn't work that way. You have to change the people. You have to bring the people to the proper behavior. It takes a lot to bring the people back to God. A lot more than just, of course, it's a start to get rid of the idols and to bring people to the temple and to teach them about the one and only God and what he wants and what the laws are that he wants you to follow and how he wants you to live and so on. But it's not enough to gain God's favor just to do that. You have to actually bring the people back. But Tzidkiyahu didn't see it that way. All he saw was that, well, Yoshiyahu did everything right, and God killed him anyway. So, he had no reason to be faithful to God, at least in his mind, the way he saw things. So he was evil, so he was bad. And then, when it came time to, in his decision-making process, a person like that could make a foolish decision like this and rebel against Babylon. Probably had in mind, as we see from the book of Jeremiah, that the maybe Egypt will come help him out, maybe or maybe he thought that his magic if God doesn't help, maybe all of his idols will help him. Whatever his reasoning was, Tzidkiyahu went on the wrong path and decided to rebel against the king of Babylon. This concludes chapter 24, and unfortunately we now know what the next inevitable happening is going to be. The king of Babylon is not going to take well for this vassal Tzidkiyahu he put on the throne, rebelling again. The next step is going to be a major disaster, which we are going to read about together in the next podcast. Thank you so much for studying chapter 24 with me. Looking forward to studying chapter 25 and the rest of this book of Kings together. Have a wonderful day.